Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. It's a life-threatening monster growing to a Category 3 heading into the Florida Panhandle. It looks like there'll be torrential floods and storm surge, but the flooding will probably go into Alabama and Georgia. It is a huge thing, and they say it's life-threatening. And it started out as a tropical storm, grew up to a Category 2. They think it'll hit a Category 3 before it makes landfall. And they are talking about life-threatening, devastating to the poor people who live in that area, too.
And getting out of any part of Florida, you know, is a bit of a challenge as well. But the Category 2 now is expected to grow stronger as it approaches the coast with winds that could exceed 111 miles per hour. Can you imagine? As Heather Sells reports, Florida is preparing for the worst.
Forecasters believe Michael could intensify before it makes landfall on Wednesday. People in Florida and Alabama are preparing for a potentially historic storm.
This is a massive storm. We've not seen anything like it in the Panhandle.
Michael's winds have risen to 90 miles an hour as it approaches the northeast Gulf Coast.
Michael is forecast to continue to move to the north-northwest, then northerly, then turn to the northeast as it makes landfall. Probably coming in as a major hurricane. Coming in as a Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, with winds probably around 120 miles an hour near that center of circulation.
It could dump as much as a foot of rain in the Panhandle as it moves inland, and its winds could top 110 miles an hour. The governor has declared a state of emergency for 35 Florida counties, and the entire state of Alabama is under an emergency declaration. Authorities have issued mandatory evacuation orders for low-lying coastal areas in Florida. Those who plan to stay are filling sandbags, boarding up windows, and stocking up on food and water.
We weren't nervous last night when we went to bed, and then we woke up this morning and all of a sudden it was first a Category 2, and now it's looking like it's going to be worse than that. So we're a little nervous.
We're hoping that it's not what's going to hit us directly.
In the Gulf, cruise ships are changing their routes. The Air Force is moving aircraft from its base near Panama City, and many residents are just hoping to fill up their vehicles before Michael hits. Michael could also impact areas outside the Gulf Coast. Downpours are expected from the Carolinas all the way west to Texas. Severe storms could also hit the southern plains and lower Great Plains. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, I'd like to shock you with another one, too. Not only a bad hurricane, but another news, it could be the biggest threat our country is facing. And you aren't hearing about it from either party. John Jessup has more.
Thanks, Pat. The U.S. economy is booming and unemployment is at its lowest level in decades. But a strong economy carries the risk of inflation. The Fed's response is raising short-term interest rates, and long-term interest rates are rising too. But that means exploding payments on the national debt. So what's the solution to this series of problems? CBN's White House correspondent Ben Kennedy went to President Trump's economic advisors for answers.
The U.S. is on track for an annual deficit of $1 trillion. Major deficits like that are expected to drive the national debt from $21 to $33 trillion in a matter of 10 years. President Trump's economic advisors tell CBN News that lawmakers need to act now to avoid a crisis. The U.S. deficit soars as the economy booms. Federal borrowing continues to rise thanks to Congress passing legislation to suspend the debt ceiling. As a result, in March, the debt hit $21 trillion.
I fear that it might take another financial crisis before Congress acts. But then it might be too late.
The Heritage Foundation's Stephen Moore says D.C. is in the midst of a bipartisan spending spree.
We've seen a rocketing of our debt, especially in the last 10 years, where, you know, Obama took the debt from 10 to 20 trillion.
If the debt payments continue to rise and rise, do you see them getting bigger than major programs like the military?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, the most important thing is in controlling the debt is to grow the economy. That's the advice that I gave to Donald Trump.
Trump's chief economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, agrees. What drastic actions are you recommending to stop the rising debt that doesn't damage the economy or cause interest rates to spike?
I don't think, by the way, there's any particular relationship between the debt and interest rates. But I want to reduce the debt burden on the economy. So, growth. You've got debt numerator, GDP denominator. Okay? Get that GDP up.
The gross domestic product is the value of U.S. goods and services used to examine the nation's overall economic health. Kudlow recommends growing the economy to the max so that the government brings in more money to make the interest payments on the debt.
The trick is get that ratio as low as possible. And I don't think we're in any danger zone right now, but I'd like to see it come down.
And rising interest rates can be very expensive for Washington and taxpayers. The government paid out more than $450 billion in interest payments on the national debt in each of the last 2 years. If rates rise just a half a point or so, that could add another $70 to $100 billion or more to those payments every year. And Moore points out that will add up over time.
If the interest rate goes up a quarter of a point, or let's say half a point, what kind of impact will that have on paying off the debt?
So every 1 percentage point increase in the interest rate increases the debt payments over a decade by $1 trillion. So we're talking about really large numbers.
Moore recommends one way to slow down the skyrocketing debt is to reform programs like Social Security and Medicare, plus delaying the retirement age because people are living longer.
We've known for 30 years that the Titanic is headed to the iceberg in Social Security and Medicare. We know the American people are aging. I'm a baby boomer. There's 80 million of us. You know, in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to stop paying taxes and we're going to start collecting all these government benefits. It's not going to work.
Bottom line, this is a long-run problem that neither party is addressing. In the meantime, the government won't face any limit on borrowing until March. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
Some of those figures are astronomical. And Pat, you've been warning about this for some time.
I have indeed, and I'm warning again, ladies and gentlemen, that this is going to destroy the Western nations. This profligacy, and that's what it amounts to. We're spending money we don't have. And it looks like people don't seem to care. The people in Congress don't seem to care. And it's always, well, yay, cut their benefits, but don't touch mine. But the thing is, it's got to be shared sacrifice all the way across the board, but particularly in the retirement age. You know, let's face it, people, I mean, 68 is just, I mean, it's like the new 50. I mean, people are living a lot longer. The health care is good, and people are living longer, and so to be paying out Medicare and Social Security and these other things to people at these earlier stages is a big mistake. You know, there was a commission. I was very pleased with the work of that commission. They got the thing in balance over a period of time, and they made reasonable cuts across the board to these entitlements and other things. That's Obama ignored all that, just kept on spending. He had no concept of fiscal sanity, none whatsoever. I mean, none whatsoever. He was just kind of just keep on spending. Let's borrow another $1 trillion and see if we can't spend it on some favored people. And these infrastructure projects were a joke. I mean, the whole thing has been horrible. But the trouble is that Trump is a big spender, and these others are too. And just think about it. You know, 1 point more in interest rates, and you're talking about $1 trillion over 10 years. 1 point. And the interest on the national debt will be more than we spend on military, on social programs and infrastructure, et cetera. There's almost no room for the government to have any money for anything. And it's going to be monstrous. And if the United States loses its preferred status as a reserve currency, then it's Katie bar the door. And the Chinese are just licking their chops and you know, looking forward to the day when America fails. There's already an attempt to bring forth a different currency, backed by gold and the Chinese renminbi and possibly some other gold-backed currencies. There's no doubt about it. The fact that if we lose our reserve currency status, the borrowing is going to increase enormously. You say, well, all we've got to do is just print more money and we've got more money. That's just because we can print it and we're the reserve currency. And after a while, people are going to say, no way. But ladies and gentlemen, this is going to affect us. It might not hit this generation, but it's sure going to hit our children and grandchildren. And it will reduce the standard of living in this country as Trump said, we can be like Venezuela. We've got a story about that later, too, about what's going on down there. But we don't want to be a banana republic. We want to be the leader. And you can't be a leader if you are profligate. And we are. Okay, John, what you got?
Pat, Supreme Court Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh hears his first cases on the High Court today. President Trump held a ceremonial swearing in at the White House Monday night. The sitting Supreme Court justices were all there, as well as Senate leaders who helped secure his confirmation. The president expressed sorrow that the process turned ugly.
On behalf of our nation, I want to apologize to Brett and the entire Kavanaugh family for the terrible pain and suffering you have been forced to endure. I have long been told that...
The president also lashed out at those who opposed his nominee, calling the situation disgraceful. Kavanaugh described the confirmation process as, quote, contentious and emotional, but said he has no bitterness. Well, President Trump said he has no plans to fire Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. The two men spoke aboard Air Force One Monday. Trump also said he has a very good relationship with Rosenstein, who oversees Robert Mueller's Russia probe, and came under fire last month after news reports suggested he discussed recording conversations with Trump and using the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein denied those reports. The details of his conversation with the president were not disclosed. Well, North Korea is ready to allow international inspectors to observe the dismantling of a key nuclear testing site. That's the word after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's fourth visit to North Korea. But even Pompeo admits that ridding Pyongyang of its nuclear weapons will be a long, slow process. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Secretary Pompeo called the trip very productive and said a second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un is very close to becoming a reality. Still, major questions remain, including, is North Korea serious about change, or is it all just a stalling tactic? The meeting between Pompeo and Kim lasted about 2 hours. Afterward, the Secretary of State tweeted, "Had a good trip to Pyongyang to meet with Chairman Kim," and added the leaders continue to make progress on agreements made at Singapore summit. That was followed by President Trump's positive note, "Progress made on Singapore summit agreements. I look forward to seeing Chairman Kim again in the near future." But other parts of Asia still have concerns. Prior to the visit, Pompeo assured Japan's foreign minister that his country's interests would also be addressed.
As I travel to Pyongyang to make sure that we're fully in sync with respect to missile programs, the CBW program, we will bring up the issue of the abductees as well.
State Department officials said over the weekend the Secretary and Kim agreed to instruct their teams to meet soon, and that Kim invited inspectors to visit the Pyongyang nuclear test site to confirm it had been dismantled. D.C. experts in foreign relations say with 90% of North Korea's exports going through China, Beijing is the one who's really calling the shots. China will soon face new investment restrictions and new taxes on billions of Chinese imports. So the pressure is on.
China is not going to back maximum pressure anymore. In fact, they're going to use it as a chip, a bargaining chip in this whole process. So if President Trump is going to strike a deal on North Korea, this is when he's going to get the best terms. Anytime after that, it's going to get a lot harder.
On the CBN News program, The Global Lane, Harry Kazianis with the Center for the National Interest told Gary Lane how China can circumvent U.S. economic sanctions against Kim.
Almost all of the oil that goes into North Korea comes from one pipeline, comes from China, and that's 90% of North Korea's oil. All that China has to do is open up the taps and maximum pressure is toast.
Just last week, Vice President Mike Pence signaled a Cold War with China, accusing the Chinese government of orchestrating an aggressive military, economic, and political campaign to gain more influence here in the United States. So experts say it's still a long road ahead to get nuclear weapons off the Korean peninsula. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Eric. Pat, do you trust North Korea's latest moves?
I don't trust North Korea at all until they stop persecuting Christians and open up the gulags. They have the most repressive state in the world, probably, and the fact that they blow up a few supposed nuclear sites or missile sites doesn't stop what they're doing with the other people. I think the civil rights and human rights record has got to be under scrutiny. to get that whole thing together. But you know, the thing about China, it's a mixed bag. China is so big, and they have such poverty. The standard of living is, you know, how many calories of food you get a day, and it's like 2,000 calories or something like that. Well, that's not enough to sustain somebody very well, but they put that as the poverty line. And in our country, that would be, you know, desperately poor. But they have millions and millions of people that need work, and I don't think the Chinese really want a war, but it certainly is. There's one faction of their country that keeps making bellicose moves, and it's something we have to watch. But I really believe that in China they have a huge number of Christians, and I think the question is whether the Christians will have, there's probably more Christians than there are communists in China right now, and whether that command economy is going to work. But anyhow, I'm hopeful for China. I really am, and I question whether or not we want to start World War III or whatever it is with China. But they certainly are. They're stealing our intellectual property on a massive scale, and it's got to stop. I mean, they force every country that does business with them to turn over their trade secrets as a price of doing business. Well, we can't allow that to continue. But I'm telling you, it's a confrontation that I'd just as soon avoid if I could. Well, you remember a few years ago, I was listening to one of our brilliant reporters give a report on the status of Venezuela, and the man who was then the president of Venezuela said that, people might be trying to assassinate him. And my thought was, well, why don't we go ahead and do it? Well, that made international headlines, that what kind of a monster I was to suggest anything as horrible as taking out a leader of a South American country. Well, I think I was right. And if you look at what's happening down there now, inflation is Venezuela is one of the largest producers of petroleum in the world. It has one of the largest deposits of it's a crude oil. I mean, it's thicker. It's not the light we've got out of what's called Bonnie Light, but it's heavy crude. But nevertheless, they've got it, and it's been ruined. And a man who's a bus driver, I think, or cab driver, whatever he was, named Maduro, has taken power. And he has ruined the economy. It is one of the most unbelievable things that I have ever heard of. And we're faced with that now. Now, what I don't understand is why the Organization of American States doesn't move in and say, this is a failed state, we've got to take over. We've got to, bolster their armed forces and get rid of Maduro and his crew. But if the United States comes in, it's always, well, the Yankee imperialists have come in and the South Americans get their backs up when that happens. But somebody's got to act on it. And here's John with a report of the shocking inflation going on in Venezuela.
Thanks, Pat. Inflation continues to sink the Venezuelan economy in a death spiral. Consumer prices rose nearly 500,000% in the past year. Monthly inflation rose another 10% from August to September. The International Monetary Fund predicts prices could rise 1,000,000% this year. And, Pat, this happens amid a broader economic meltdown fueled by the government's socialist policies. Well,
I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know why the OAS doesn't make a move. And I think Trump's got his hands full of everything known to man. He's doing wonderful work, and I salute him and congratulate him. But I do think that something's got to be done in Venezuela because it's spilling over. The people are suffering horribly. You imagine 1,000,000% inflation. It boggles the mind. There's no money, no saving, and what they've done is destroy their companies. And they own an American oil company called Citgo, and there are lawsuits now against Venezuela and very possibly trying to cut off Citgo. So they don't have much money coming in. And Cuba used to bail them out, but Cuba hadn't got much money either. So it's going to be a real problem. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, But now's the time for action, and I would like to see the OAS do what its shoulder its responsibility, and the nations of Latin America need to get together and say, let's move and kick out Maduro and have a regime change in that country and stop these insane policies that have destroyed what was a great, thriving economy in Latin America.